America's newest gift to the continent, the hula hoop craze, spreading like wildfire.
The hula hoop became an instant icon, the granddaddy of all fads. Spinning, spiraling, it was downright hypnotic. Thanks to the savvy marketing campaign of its creator, Wham-O, this toy and the company's other plastic products left a lasting legacy in the decades to follow. American culture was transformed. The 1950s weren't only a time of rock and roll and poodle skirts, but also of consumerism and suburbia. As soldiers returned home from World War II, they brought with them a fresh new air of progress and potential. The United States emerged as victors of the war, not only politically but economically as well. The creation and shipment of war supplies to the Allied forces was instrumental in propelling the nation out of the Great Depression. And so, as the 1950s advanced, new jobs were created and a revolutionary middle class surfaced. They introduced a baby boom, which generated the need for cheap housing, innovative transportation, and consumer goods. A conformist Levittown family became the hallmark of the United States. Suddenly, it was all about keeping up with the Joneses, and this materialistic mentality was a boon for businesses across the nation. It was the ideal platform for leaders Richard Nere and Arthur Spud Mellin to build a toy company that would leave a legacy on the world's culture. Wham-O. Freshly graduated from the University of Southern California, Richard Nere and Arthur Spud Mellin, two spunky childhood friends, began work at a used car shop in downtown Los Angeles. But it wasn't long until they segued into creating their own handcrafted slingshots from orange crates, which instantly became in high demand. Then, in 1948, they said goodbye to Nere and Mellin, the car salesmen, and hello to Nere and Mellin, the entrepreneurs. Their new venture had a rocky start until they began sending out mail orders, a cutting-edge idea.
Started coming in one or two at a time in these envelopes, and it wasn't long before he described sacks of these envelopes coming from the post office.
Soon they named their company Wham-O, after the sound the slingshot makes. Little did they know that this company would rock 1950s American culture just as hard as Elvis Presley once did.
In periods where there is no leadership, society stands still. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better.
And in 1957, Wham-O released its second product, the Frisbee. Later, Wham-O would go on to produce the Slip and Slide, the Super Ball, and the Hacky Sack. The toys were innovative, as was the men's modern-day advertising. In particular, they traveled to playgrounds and used local kids to provide feedback on the toys. This idea of focusing on consumption audience was revolutionary in the 1950s. It was the first version of a modern-day focus group, using real customers to generate better business. While focus groups have been used during World War II to examine the effectiveness of propaganda, Wham-O was one of the originals to apply it to 1950s enterprise. However, today, focus groups are essential for any good company, from Hershey's chocolate to Apple's computers. The leadership of Nere and Mellin was instrumental in developing this lasting marketing tool. But they also spent numerous hours researching new ideas. On one trip, Wham-O's most prominent toy was developed from Australian bamboo exercise rings, the hula hoop. Spotting a niche in the American market, they returned home to manufacture their own version of the toy.
My mother and Spud's wife would demonstrate hula hoops in parks and recreation centers around the country.
Then, after the men featured the spinning rings during one of Dinah Shore's performances, the hoops started flying off the shelves. In 4 months, 25 million hula hoops were sold. Eventually, the number grew to over 100 million. Adjusted for inflation, it was a $346 million profit, $1.98 apiece.
A new toy, the plastic hoop, has sprung full-blown on the American scene. The end, if there is one, seems nowhere in sight.
U.S. patent number 3,079,728 was a sensation. It was a hula hoop mania. Songs sprung up devoted entirely to the experience of hooping, and commercials for Wham-O abounded on every station. 20 million children were twirling them on their hips, and Nere and Mellin had created the biggest craze the world has ever seen. And for this hoopla, Nere and Mellin unearthed a never-before-used material for their trademarked hula hoop, polyethylene.
hey, we've got something new coming in our kettle that we've never seen before.
Banks stumbled upon a cutting-edge concoction while working in his polymer chemistry lab in Bartsville, Oklahoma. The Phillips Petroleum Company was experimenting with plastic and polymers, a phenomenon still in its infancy. In 1954, he patented Marlex polyethylene, but unlike the Wham-O creators, success wasn't instantaneous. Inventories piled up in the warehouses.
And the two owners of Wham-O heard about this kind of pile of off-spec high-density polyethylene, and they said, well, we can take it off your hands. And they used it to create the hula hoop.
Sales for this plastic hoop skyrocketed, and so did the demand for Marlex. As Wham-O bought up stockpiles of the plastic, polyethylene became a multi-billion-dollar global industry. But how did Wham-O's leaders' decision to use polyethylene leave a legacy? Wham-O brought the material onto the world stage. They developed one of the most popular toys of all time, thus generating talk about the product's material. After all, the hula hoop is nothing without the plastic that creates it. Marlex is formed from a catalyst that transforms ethylene and propylene into a semi-rigid form of plastic, unlike no other in the 1950s. Upon Wham-O's success with polyethylene, other companies joined in. A leader is essentially nothing without its followers. Crest, Neutrogena, Energizer, Heinz, and Ford, to name a few. Today, it is one of the 5 most commonly used forms of plastic, used in binders and battery cases, landfill liners and food packaging, carpeting, and syringes. And without Wham-O popularizing it with the hula hoop, Phillips Petroleum would have failed financially, removing the legacy that exists today. However, as Marlex worked its way into the forefront of American culture, the hula hoop worked its way out. An original idiom entered the vernacular. It went the way of the hula hoop.
We damn near went broke.
From producing 20,000 hula hoops a day to virtually zero, Nur and Malin were dumbfounded. They hadn't expected the sensation, which had been so popular from January to October, to die out at all, let alone so fast. It wasn't conventional for products to recede into oblivion overnight. Nevertheless, the hula hoop did just that. It emerged as the very first fad. There is a big difference between a trend and a fad.
Because a fad kind of implies that something hugely successful and then it goes away, never to be heard from again or rarely heard of.
Whereas a trend evolves into a relatively permanent change.
50 years later, people still measure things against the hula hoop.
And although the hula hoop resurged briefly throughout the decades, the hoopla never came close to reaching the level of popularity it once was. The fad culture commenced primarily due to the leadership of Nur and Malin in advertising. They transported their products directly to consumers and created a toy that was accessible and affordable for all people, regardless of age, gender, and social class. Even television advertising in the 1950s aided in generating this fad.
The reason we have such a high standard of living is because advertising has created an American frame of mind that makes people want more things, better things, and newer things.
The 1950s marked the first time Americans began shifting away from the use and reuse mindset of the Great Depression era. Our current popular culture is dominated by a fad mentality. Pet rocks, Beanie Babies, leg warmers, Cabbage Patch dolls, Crocs, Webkins, silly bands. It all started with Wham-O. Even though Arthur Spud Malin and Richard Nur have sadly passed away, their leadership and legacy remain.
Nur leaves behind a legacy of baby boomer icons.
Television advertisements, focus groups, and product testing are all widely utilized by businesses, following Wham-O's lead. Polyethylene, which once seemed like it would never see the light of day, was brought by Nur and Malin into the world where it thrived.
If Spud and I had to say what we contributed, it was fun. But I think this country gave us more than we gave it. It gave us the opportunity to do it.
The attributes of the 1950s paved the way for them to emerge as leaders on the world stage, forever altering culture. Today, this legacy, both in plastic and in fads, prevails. Not only are all of our toys shifted from wood to plastic, but so has the rest of our culture. Our era can be defined as the plasticization of humanity, connecting with the fad lifestyle that Wham-O launched. Although Wham-O achieved great success, like many prior inventors, their start was humble. The cramped garage of Richard Nur. Disney began in a garage, Amazon and Microsoft began in garages. So naturally, the toy company with the greatest legacy and most abundant leadership began the same way, in a garage. But it didn't stay there for long.
Baby, now.